world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
And we are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Tuesday, December 16th, as you are listening to this. And of course, we've got a lot to talk about because we always have a lot to talk about. Now, yesterday's podcast, I did record way late. I did get it up. And by the time it got uploaded, I don't know what was going on with my internet connection, but it was going super slow. It took like 2 hours to upload from the time I started till it was actually up and loaded. But it was up. You guys had a podcast. I hope you all enjoyed it. Now, we're going to get into the news for today. We got some things we are watching, some stuff I've been covering. We are still waiting for an outcome from the House and the Senate to figure out the ACA subsidies. There hasn't been any new breaks yet, but I still think they're ultimately going to come up with something like a 2-year plan. 2 years of extending the subsidies makes sense from a political standpoint. Maybe not in a practicality standpoint for everybody, but you got to think like a politician. And the reason I say that is because if they extend it only to next year, that's all they're going to get bombarded with for questions during the midterms. If they expire, that's all they're going to get bombarded with for questions, all next year for the midterms. Republicans don't want to have to answer those questions. They don't want to have to deal with it or anything. What they would rather do is kick the can down the road and ignore it. And if they go out to 27, well, it's past the midterms. And then either they're in control of the House and the Senate or they're not. And it's somebody else's problem. If they're not. If they are, well, then they can do something then and try to get ahead of it before the general in 28. And you could convince Donald Trump to sign a 2-year extension, even though he doesn't like it. All you'd have to do is say something simple like pat him on the back and say, look, Donnie, I know you don't like it, but you'd look like a genius if you'd sign it by saying, hey, we need the 2 years. That would give us time to turn around and get everything in place, and we could figure out how to make your plan work and work correctly so it doesn't fail. But see, that's how Donald Trump thinks. You got to reach him how he thinks, and that's how you would do that. Now, today is the 16th. We are 3 days away from releasing the Epstein files. I've got something I'm going to talk about later on regarding those files. Now, Donald Trump does not want the Epstein files released in any way, shape, or form. He doesn't. And I think, and I've been saying that is going to be how the Republicans ultimately walk away from Donald Trump. But we will have to see what that brings. Now, let's get into the stories I want to talk about today. We've got this big story that has been coming out. Donald Trump is suing in Florida the British Broadcasting Company for $10 billion, claiming defamation. They're basically saying, well, they took his words out of context when it comes to what he said on January 6, 2021. That's the gist of the lawsuit, the way I understand it. And he's suing them for $10 billion. This is just another attempt to strong arm a media company. And he's sending a message to the rest of the media. Do what I want, only publish good things about me, or I'm going to sue you into oblivion. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. I think the BBC is going to win this. I think they're going to push back. And I saw a creator on TikTok. I am not well versed in British law and British things. Don't get me wrong. So I am by no means an expert here. I'm going by what this other creator said, who was better versed in those things. And this creator said, well, there are rules and laws in place, and that Britain doesn't have the same extended legality or the extended judgments that America has. And like the most he could get would convert to 300,000 US. You know, that all he could get is about 300,000. And I don't know how those two laws work together. Now, if he is owed the money, if this were to go to trial, and I don't know that they actually want it to go to trial, Donald Trump is hoping, I believe, that he can use the threat of the lawsuit to get a settlement. If the BBC comes back and says, "Yeah, Donnie, we'll give you $1 billion, make it go away," that's what he wants. He just wants a quick cash grab, hopes he can scare him into giving him what he wants, which is quick money. That's all he cares about, and maybe a retraction and a puff piece where he can point to, well, see the BBC, they're just crooked. They settled with me because they knew they were going to lose $10 billion. That gives him everything he wants, right? Donald Trump only cares about perception and how he can spin the narrative to make himself look better. We talk about it all the time. And by going after the BBC like this, he is trying so desperately to control that narrative. And I expect that he's going to ramp things up against other news outlets as everything starts to crumble around him. He's got a failing economy. He has not really ended any wars. He's got the Russia Ukraine conflict still going on. You've got Israel and Hamas still kind of going at it. It hasn't been in the forefront of the news, but it doesn't sound like that peace treaty is entirely in place. You just have the failing economy and the Epstein files and the double tap and all of these things he's trying to juggle. And as he continues to try to keep more and more of these negative stories out of the press, and he wants to control that narrative, he is going to try to do more things like this, suing other news outlets, trying to scare them into giving in and giving him his way. Now, this lawsuit is very early on. It was just filed in the last day or so. And we will have to see how this all plays out. But this all surrounds January 6th and him trying to spin that message, trying to again shift the blame away from himself. He wants us to forget about how bad January 6th was. He wants to say it was just peaceful protesters that got out of hand, except in that they were all Democrats and it was a hoax and it was, FBI plants, etc. None of that makes any sense. First of all, they were at a rally. They started at a rally led by him, where he said he was going to march with them down to the Capitol. He never went, but they go down to the Capitol from his rally, and then they break into the Capitol building. Now, why would the left try to break in to stop the certification of an election that was going to have the replacement for Donald Trump confirmed? Why would they do that? That makes no sense. They would want it to go off without a hitch. It only, like, if you stop and think about it for any length of time, you would go, that doesn't make a lot of sense. It makes more sense that right-leaning, MAGA leaning people would want to break in and stop the certification of the election so that they can put their guy in, that they can make sure Donald Trump won and stop the certification of an election that he lost. But see, MAGA doesn't think that far ahead. So they're dealing with that. Like, that's what he wants us to believe, right? He wants us to believe this false narrative. And now he's going after the BBC, trying to control that narrative so we don't believe the things we actually saw. He wants to control the narrative with everything he is dealing with. And that level, and that's just going to keep, it's not going to work long term. All of these other networks are going to hopefully, especially if the BBC doesn't fold and they win this out and they don't just settle, that it goes that the snowball starts going, right? That the other networks suddenly start saying, well, fuck you, Donald Trump. We're not doing what you want. Okay, sticking with lawsuits, Donald Trump was sued again by the DC Preservation League. This is a group that uh, their whole purpose is to help preserve historic buildings and landmarks. And I believe they were part of the lawsuit I talked about on one of the recent podcasts. I don't remember which day, where we were talking about how he got sued over his tearing down of the East Wing, in part because they didn't do environmental studies. They didn't go in and try to preserve a bunch of stuff. And you're going to have MAGA say, well, they moved everything out. But if you watch some of the images, it looks like there was still furniture sitting there, that there was artwork sitting there. They just came through and said, yeah, this is all garbage, and just tore it all down. And they didn't follow the proper procedures. In fact, the oversight groups that Donald Trump should have consulted, but didn't because Donald Trump knows best, according to him, just ask him, he'll tell you. They were out because of the government shutdown. He didn't have to deal with them, at least in his mind. He's like, well, they're not there, so I don't got to talk to them. That'd be like saying, well, the city building inspector is out on vacation, so I'm just going to finish up everything in my house and not have to go through and wait for him to get the permits done. And I use that as an example because I did some remodeling when I bought my house. And we had to go fight with City Hall. We were on a time crunch to get it done between myself and the contractor. I only had about a month to get everything ready to have them out of my way so I could get moved in. And that was that. Well, the city building inspector was out for like 2 or 3 weeks. Every time we tried to get him in to do this or to do that, it wasn't working. Ultimately, we're like, okay, so what are we supposed to do here? We argued with City Hall and we brought the building inspector in. You have to go through the proper channels. If I have to for doing some remodel here in my house, why shouldn't Donald Trump have to go through the proper channels for tearing down a building that is owned by the United States of America? This isn't his private property, but he's treating all of this stuff like it's in his private building portfolio, and he can just do whatever he wants. Well, he is being sued over his plans to paint the Eisenhower building. He doesn't like the color. Now, the Eisenhower building is a building right next to the White House. It's been there, I believe, I'm not even sure how many years now. I think it predates the Eisenhower administration, but they're suing it over the DC Preservation League is suing them because of the damage painting a historical building like that can cause. It can damage things like the mortar and the brick and things like that. If you don't use the right types of paint and you don't seal things the right way, if you don't take the proper steps, you can cause irreparable harm. Now, that's not to say if a court says, Donnie, you can't do that, that he's not going to try to do it anyway, because we know Donald Trump doesn't care what the courts actually say. He only cares about what courts say when they side in his favor. And his whole legal strategy is get things in front of enough judges, sue, appeal, delay, change of venue, whatever he can do to get all of his cases and keep moving them around until he finds the judge that sides with him, because he thinks that any judge he appoints should be loyal to him and give him whatever he wants. And that they should turn around and just say, yes, Donnie, you want to be able to irreparably damage this building, go right ahead. It is your personal building. And that's not how that works. Now, ultimately, Donald Trump will be gone at some point. I just hope that some of this damage can be mitigated so it's not permanent and we can go ahead and start fixing things. Now, I do apologize. I got a list here of stories that I'm trying to read from that I want to make sure I cover. Now, tomorrow night, I believe Wednesday night, which would be the 17th, Donald Trump is going to do, I believe it's at 9 p.m. Eastern, he is going to address the nation. Now, we don't know what this address is going to be. The White House has given some very scant details about this address to the nation. Um, According to Caroline Levitt, it's going to be about his accomplishments and about what's to come. Now, what does that mean? It could mean, with Donald Trump, it could mean anything. Speaking about his accomplishments, what accomplishments? Wrecking the economy, um, not keeping us out of wars, as he's actively trying to start a war with Venezuela. What accomplishments? Oh, letting people's health care expire, giving the biggest tax cuts to the wealthy, well, while letting the middle class suffer, claiming affordability is, a hoax, and that things are more affordable than ever when you don't have to uh, be a genius to realize that it's not. You just have to go to the grocery store yourself when you're paying almost $10 a pound for ground beef, or as my example I use all the time, soda. It's almost 10 to 12 bucks depending on where you're at, a 12 pack. I'm now seeing some TikToks of places going up as high as $12.99 for one 12 pack. And it wasn't that long ago you could still get them 3 for 10, 4 for 10 as an average sale. And occasionally they would pop up at 6 for 10 on a sale. Not that many years ago. And now they're $10 a piece. How do you go from something being routinely on sale at 4 for 10 to now $10 a piece? That's 4 times the price. But you want to blame Joe Biden. But it's not all Joe Biden's fault. Some of it, sure, but not all of it. You can put some of the blame on Joe Biden, maybe for not getting things fixed fast enough. But even for Joe Biden, what he was doing is he was dealing with the mess that was left from Donald Trump from COVID. And how Donald Trump handled COVID wrecked the supply chain, ultimately destroyed the supply chain. Okay, Donald Trump mishandles COVID, is more worried about keeping the economy open and keeping the factories running and things like that. And of course, because he didn't do things to mitigate panic, people went out and panic bought. That's why you had a TP shortage. You remember the toilet paper shortage in 2020 when Donald Trump was president? You couldn't go to the grocery store and get whatever brand you wanted. You were lucky to find whatever they had. And there were a lot of days where you'd go to the grocery store and they would have the teepee sitting there, and it would be limit one. You could only buy one pack, but there were people for no other reason than they wanted to have some sense of control over everything that was going on. It was something they could hold on to. Well, at least I'm not going to run out of toilet paper, and they'd go buy one every single day, whether they needed it or not, because they were paranoid about running out. And people were trying to pass tips and things on about what else you could use if you absolutely ran out and you were desperate, right? If he would have handled COVID better, we wouldn't have had those kind of things. If he would have mitigated the panic better, if Donald Trump would have done a better job, we wouldn't have had those issues, and we wouldn't be facing the economic problems that he is trying to still blame Joe Biden for not fixing fast enough. Well, that's a problem. Donald Trump is ultimately to blame for everything going wrong right now, because even the things, for the most part, that he wants to blame Joe Biden for still started under Donald Trump the first time. So, what is this Oval Office meeting going to be? What could it be? Could it be Donald Trump actually doing something crazy? Is he going to announce that he is starting a war with Venezuela? He said land strikes could be coming. That could be it. Is it something more like uh, that he's got a new initiative, a new plan? Maybe he's going to finally announce a better healthcare plan that he could actually get through Congress. Probably not. What is he going to finally announce and release his MRI records for what's going on with his health? Probably not. Is he going to resign? Probably not. There is some speculation that this could be his uh, resignation of him talking about everything that is good for this country, everything he has done that is great, and the what's to come could be him saying, well, you got to rally around JD Vance. I doubt it. I doubt he resigns. I doubt he resigns out of fear. I doubt he resigns over his health. His health isn't good. We know that. We talked about how bad his health is all the time. And unless he got some very, very bad news explained to him in a way that he would accept, because you can't treat Donald Trump like a normal person when it comes to bad news like that. Most people, you go to the doctor and you get bad news. You get told, well, you got this condition or that condition or whatever, and these are the steps you got to take. You would look at the doctor and say, well, thank you, doctor. Okay, what do I do now? What treatments do I do now? Somebody like Donald Trump would call the doctor a quack to their face and say, well, you don't know what you're talking about. I'm in perfect health. You have to find a way to explain it to Donald Trump in a way that he was willing to accept. Now, I don't know how you do that. I don't know if you can convince him that he is dealing with something, unless the only way they could potentially do it is if they've worked out some kind of a backdoor deal, potentially with him as far as JD Vance and maybe a pardon. But I don't think his personality would allow him to accept a pardon. Why? Because a pardon would mean, well, he's done something wrong, and his personality wouldn't accept that. As much as he's terrified of being charged criminally for anything that's going on. But again, if you've done nothing wrong, like Donald Trump likes to tell us he's done nothing wrong, he says it all the time, then why would you ever need a pardon? So we'll have to see what this address to the nation could be. If it is him resigning and us moving on to JD Vance, I've talked about it before. JD Vance is going to be the better option because JD Vance will slowly, probably, I don't think he would do it very quickly, but maybe get rid of all of the nut jobs that are in this cabinet. You wouldn't have Linda McMahon as education secretary. You wouldn't have um, RFK and Dr. Oz and the rest of the clowns in all of the positions that they're in. He would be able to get decent people in doing those jobs so that way they can turn around and start actively, hopefully, doing something. But he also wouldn't have the same pull over Congress. He's not well liked by Republicans. Now, would they fall in line with him like they would Donald Trump? No. Not even if they were given explicit marching orders by Donald Trump to fall in line. Because if Donald Trump does resign somehow, or if they decide that they're going to 25th Amendment him or impeach and remove him, whatever they choose to do, his time is done, right? He's pretty much a lame duck. If he costs them the House and the Senate, like I think is possible in the midterms, he's a lame duck. He can't be elected again. His power is pretty much over. He's not going to be able to threaten them, even if he is leaving office and saying, hey, we continue the mission under the next guy. There's no guarantee that they actually listen to him and do just that. So we will have to see what this Oval Office address actually means. I think it is going to be probably just a fluff piece. Donald Trump trying to get out ahead, talking about all the good things that he thinks he has done, and trying to control that narrative ahead of what is coming here in just 3 short days, which is the release of the Epstein files. Now, Pete Hegseth is coming out, and of course, he's trying to say that the double tap video is national security, and he's not releasing it. Well, of course, he's not releasing it because it makes him look bad. If it was as clean and as clear cut as what they want us to believe, that it was perfectly legit and legal, um, then why wouldn't they release it? Now, they want us to believe that these boats were heading for the United States, even though some of them sounds like they weren't, and that they were full of illicit substances, narcotics, contraband, whatever term you want to use. Now, I've talked about it before. The proper way for them to have dealt with this, because we've got GPS satellites, we've got ships in the area, we got all sorts of things we could use, would be to track these boats, wait till they hit U.S. water, seize the boats, or stop the boats, search and seize any contraband, and then arrest and charge uh, the people responsible. That's the correct way to deal with it. Instead, they just say, "Well, they're narco terrorists," and kaboom. What? That's not how we deal with things. That's not the correct way. But Pete Hegseth is worried about what could happen if this video gets out, right? There's already calls for his impeachment. There's calls for his removal. Um, and he's terrified of that potentially happening. I think he's worried about what would happen after he is no longer Secretary of Defense. And I'm going to continue to call him the Secretary of Defense until Congress officially changes the name, because Donald Trump renaming the department to the War Department is just dumb. And it's going to revert back once he's out of office. Maybe not under J.D. Vance, but unless Congress officially changes it, once a Democrat's back in office, they're going to go back to calling it the Department of Defense. And on calling it the War Department, this is just another example of Donald Trump being dumb, because he wants us to believe that he deserves some kind of a peace prize, all while renaming the Department of Defense to the War Department. Calling it the War Department does not make it sound like you are a very peaceful person. Now, Caroline Leavitt was back out talking about Donald Trump and his hands, and about the bruising on his hands, about how bad they are. And it's pretty obvious that he has got very significant bruising all over the back of his hands. And she says, well, that's just from so much rigorous handshaking. I've never known anybody to get bruises on their hands from shaking hands. Not that I'm aware of. Those look more like what you would see from somebody who is getting an IV into the back of the hand. Now, back of the hand is a target IV spot if you can't get it in the arm. It's a secondary use. And I know several people who have had to have that done, that was the best spot that they could get found because of whatever reason. Sometimes it was underlying medical conditions. Sometimes it was, just age. For whatever reason, they couldn't get a vein caught in the arm, so they went to the hand. And sometimes they just go to the hand because it's easier. But if he is doing some kind of an IV treatment, it wouldn't be surprising. And if he's doing it with some frequency, that he is getting major bruising on his hands, that before it is time to fully heal, that they're poking him again, that they're going after it, that they're having to hit him again. And that is just more likely than her claim of it being handshaking. Now, there is a Democratic member of Congress who is suggesting that what Donald Trump is getting is a $26,000 a month anti-dementia drug. And that's entirely possible. That would explain Donald Trump having taken multiple cognitive tests, that would explain Donald Trump getting MRIs because you're looking to see the progression of what's going on. How, is he closer to being, or, is it helping? Is it working? Is it delaying things? Is it getting worse? Is it staying the same? What's going on there? Now, no proof of that. It could be something as simple as because his diet is horrible, that he is just getting IV fluids. Could be. It could be something as simple as who knows, right? Maybe he just needs dialysis or something like that, and that's what they're doing. We don't know because they're not telling us. Because they have to keep up this mystique, this air of Donald Trump being in perfect health. He's not. I mean, we see it all the time, right? We see Donald Trump. We see the effects of what he has got going on. He is sleeping in public, dragging his foot, slurring his words. His face starts to droop. He's sundowning. There are multiple nights where he is spending 3 hours posting on social media at a rate of a post a minute, trying to keep everything going and just stream of consciousness. Some of it doesn't make a lot of sense. He's sharing the same thing 4 and 5 times over and over and over again, all because he thinks it makes him look good. He's out back trying to do rallies again, in part because I don't know if he realizes he can't run for election again, but also to get himself back in front of the crowd. But it's just another sign that he is not well. He seems low energy at a lot of the events. And like I said, we've seen him falling asleep in meetings. It's not uncommon to watch him just kind of drift off, head drop, and everything. And he kind of jolts himself awake. He reminds me a lot. I talk about it all the time, but he reminds me a lot of my grandfather, in so much that at the end of my grandfather's life, he would sit there and start falling asleep just like that. We'd be there visiting, uh, spending time with him, and we'd be carrying on having conversation or whatever. And next thing you know, he's drifted off, and we continue talking around him, and he'd just kind of wake up like nothing happened, and it would happen with some frequency. And just a week ago or so, Donald Trump was doing a meeting on this bailout for the farmers, and he dozed off. And he has somebody else was speaking because it was no longer about him. They couldn't keep his attention going anymore, and he kind of wakes up $12 billion. Like he knew that was the talking point of what they needed to be talking about, how much he was doing to help. So he turns around and he pops back awake and throws that number out there. Didn't really make sense, didn't fit into what they were talking about or anything like that. But he does that. Like he is falling asleep. I mean, this is just another problem with Donald Trump, right? Everything with him, he is trying to juggle so many things with his health and with the Epstein files and the economy and international diplomacy, his tariffs, all of it. He's not able to do things the way he once did. Now, his chief of staff, Susie Wiles, came out and she's got an explanation for Donald Trump sleeping. And she said, well, he's not sleeping. His eyes are closed and his head's back, but he's fine. So he's sitting there like this, head back, eyes closed, clearly asleep. But no, he's fine. You know, the problem with Donald Trump is that nobody around him is willing to tell him the truth. Nobody is willing to tell the American people right now the truth because if she would come out and say, yeah, Donald Trump's having problems staying awake in public, that he's fatigued all the time, she'd be fired in a heartbeat. He would fire her. She can't tell the American people what is actually going on for risk of losing her job. And of course, the people around him only care about keeping their job and keeping their power. That's just how they operate. And they don't know what else to do, right? They haven't figured out how to get around this roadblock that is Donald Trump, how to um, convince people that there's not something else going on other than just repeat the very obvious lies that Donald Trump is saying. They haven't come up with anything better because it's pretty obvious if you just look at what's going on that he is not doing well. Now, there is a good chance that he does not make it to 2028, to the midterms. Or not the midterms, the next general. Despite him wanting to say that he is going to be that he could potentially run in 28, and he made comments at a rally that he did like a little over a week ago about 2028 Trump merch. Now, if he is around and he does make it to 28, they may have to let him run a shadow campaign. And what do I mean? Well, they go out, they hold rallies, non-televised. They play him clips, maybe edited clips of his other rallies on like Fox News and stuff of rallies from 2024. Maybe that they're edited so it shows Trump 2028 on it, enough to make it look good enough for him that he would believe it. And they let him do events without actually letting him run because he's going to throw a temper tantrum like a toddler if he doesn't get to go out and campaign, if he's still around. But he is legally not allowed to run for a third term. Now, they may attempt it if he's with us. I just don't think he's going to be there. I don't think one way or another, I think Donald Trump is going to be gone. And if it's not his health, obviously it is going to be the fact that he's term limited, and courts are going to say, no, Donnie, you can't run. Or more, what I think could be the most likely outcome, if it's not his health, and if this Oval Office meeting, or not meeting, announcement tomorrow night, if that's not Donald Trump resigning, I think where the Republicans do is I think they move away from Donald Trump. And I think it has everything to do with the Epstein files. We talk about those Epstein files a lot. There is a lot of information coming out from the Epstein estate, from the House Oversight Committee, and in just 3 short days, the files are supposed to be released to the public. So the Epstein files are coming out. And Donald Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, is saying that, yeah, of course Donald Trump's in there, that they were young single playboys. If we're talking the 90s, Donald Trump would have still been in his, what, 40s, 50s? You know, we're talking 25 years ago. He's 79 now. He'd have been 54. Simple math. If we're talking before that, he would have been in his late 40s, early 50s. And she says, well, they were young single playboys. I don't, as somebody who is in his 40s now, I don't consider 40s to be young anymore. Using the word young implies that you are fresh out of high school. You're a kid. But that seems more in line with something Donald Trump would want to say. Well, I was just a young kid. Now, she claims in the Vanity Fair interview where this is pulled from that of course he's in the files, they were friends, he was on the plane, he's going to show up in the manifests. Still doesn't mean he did anything wrong. Well, that is all true. That he's probably in the manifests, and just by being in the manifest doesn't mean he did anything wrong. No. Just by going to the same parties as Jeffrey Epstein doesn't mean Donald Trump immediately did anything wrong. No, we have to see what's actually in there. And I think ultimately the Epstein files are going to be what brings Donald Trump down. I just do. I've been talking about it for a while. I think ultimately what is going to happen is Donald Trump will end up trying to fuck around and delay the release of the Epstein files in just 3 days. They're going to try to do something and not release all of it, really release a little bit or do some bullshit and say, well, that's everything we got. We don't have much. There's not much here. And he's going to try to pull some bullshit. Now, members of Congress have already seen large chunks of information related to Epstein, and they're releasing some of it. We've already seen video of Epstein's island come out where it included images of a room that had like a dentist chair. Now, why would they have a dentist chair? Well, could be for some kind of weird fetish game. Could be. It could be to alter dental records to make it so it is harder to identify the victims, or it could have just been something as simple as trying to correct any dental imperfections so that the girls were perfect and beautiful and all of those kind of things. We don't know. But all of this information is being released. And this is bad for Donald Trump. Now, her even admitting that he's in the files at all is a break from standard Trump administration procedure. They don't want to admit that he could even possibly, potentially, kind of, sort of be in the files. According to Donald Trump, barely knew the guy, despite video and photographic evidence in numerous cases showing how exactly they were connected. Donald Trump doesn't want to believe that people understand how deep this goes. They knew he was connected to Epstein. This isn't something that can go away, but he wants it to. Now, I think what's going to happen is that they're going to fuck around, try to delay or distract or divert away from releasing the files because Donald Trump really didn't want to sign that law. Okay. Now, why would he have signed it? Well, I talked about it before, but I'll bring it up again. It's like a friend of mine. Donald Trump is trying to delay for a little bit more time because he's going to figure it out. He's going to come up with something brilliant. And I mentioned this friend of mine before. Had a friend who several years ago was behind on bills. Had a solution in the short term. Took a few things over to the pawn shop. Got some quick cash. Bought himself a month. All right, I'm good to go. I got my bills figured out for a month. Well, in the end of the next month, he's still short a little bit. And he owes interest to the pawn shop. So he takes some more stuff to the pawn shop, covers that little bit of interest, pays up the where he was short in his bills, and just keeps going one after another, 1 month after another. Maybe it's 2 weeks, whatever the case was. He was constantly going, man, I'm short. Oh, I can go get another loan. I can go get another loan. He kept saying, well, this is just temporary. I'll figure it out. I'll figure it out. And he believed that he could get to a solution and that he would be brilliant enough to come up with something. He'd either, go thrifting or he'd find something on Facebook Marketplace or one of the selling apps or what have you. He was always talking about these finds. Oh man, I found this item. Man, it's worth I paid $10 for it, but it's actually worth a couple hundred. I'm going to run it over to the pawn shop and get $50. He was always trying to game the system because he thought if he could just get himself a couple more weeks, a month, whatever the case was, he was intelligent enough to come up with a solution. He never did. He lost all of his stuff to the pawn shop ultimately because he couldn't get away from it. And at one point he was actually almost clear because he had picked up a second job, was working a lot of hours, and changed his income level to where he could get away from it. And then he fell right back into that same trap and ultimately lost everything. And this is what Donald Trump did with the Epstein files. Now, it's not the same because there's not a pawn shop, but you know where I'm going with this. He's trying to do the same thing. He signed it to get him that month because he thought, I can fix it. I can come up with something brilliant. I just need a month. I just need some time. He told them to vote for it in the House, hoping it would go to the Senate, and the Senate would take 2, 3, 4 weeks, couple of months. It would fade away for a little while so we could come up with something. and nothing's coming up. And as nothing keeps coming up for this administration, as he doesn't come up with a solution, he's going to get desperate. Now, if he fucks around with the Epstein files, I think the Republicans are going to use what's in there as their way to get rid of Donald Trump. And you might think I'm crazy. Now, maybe this press conference is Donald Trump resigning because they've had that closed door meeting with him about the files ahead of their release. You know, he's doing it tomorrow night with 2 days to go till they're going to be released. Maybe he does resign, gets a federal pardon from JD Vance. I would be floored, um, but it's entirely possible, I guess, that is what happens. It just doesn't seem like Trump's MO. But as much as he wants to stay out of prison, it's potentially something he could do if you could convince him the right way that this would guarantee him no jail time. Because one of the things Donald Trump is terrified the most of is the sound of a jail cell door closing behind him, of him not being a free man, of him not being a mover and a shaker, of him not being powerful, right? Donald Trump wants to maintain this air of being the most powerful person in the world. So I think if he fucks around with these Epstein files and delays it, again, I don't know if this Oval Office meeting is going, or this Oval Office announcement is going to be him resigning because of it. But I think what Republicans in Congress are going to do if he fucks around too much, and I think they're already having closed door meetings talking about it, about do we do this, do we do that? And what they're going to do is say, okay, Donald, you fucked around with the Epstein files, you got to go. We're going to impeach you. Now, maybe they've already had that meeting with him behind closed doors. Maybe not. But I think they're having closed door meetings with themselves. And they are looking at what to do and when it is time. And doing it ahead of the Epstein file release does kind of make sense. That if he resigns ahead and he says, "Yeah, I doubt that he would resign saying that he was in the files, but it would be better for him politically to resign than have the House go after him for being in the files or for fucking around with their release." This is a very delicate situation that for this administration and for this president. I don't know how he's going to deal with it, but I think if he fucks around too much, I think the Republicans in Congress, like I said, are having closed door meetings, and I think they're discussing whether or not to remove him. Why? Because I think what they're going to do is, once they know that they need to make a move because they're worried about getting reelected and facing their voters, much like they did with releasing the Epstein files, when push came to shove and it actually came down to facing their voters, I think they are going to go ahead and say, we can't face our voters for protecting people that are in the Epstein files. We don't want to do that. That terrifies us too much. So they're going to turn around and say, yeah, we got to back off. We got to run away. And what I mean by that is saying, yeah, we got to back off from supporting Donald Trump. Now, I think House members and House Republicans and Senate Republicans are having meetings, closed door meetings. I have nothing more to go on than what makes sense logically, because obviously I'm not in Washington, D.C. I am not in the room where it happened. And if you get that reference, if you know, you know. I'm referring to Hamilton. But anyway, they're talking about, I think behind the closed doors, they're having these meetings and they're saying, okay, how many votes do we have to remove Donald Trump? And they're going to assume they have all Democrats on board. Not a guarantee you have all Democrats, because you still have John Fetterman, who is sounding more and more like a MAGA Republican. But they assume they have all. I think they start with the assumption they have all Democrats, on board, and then they start figuring out which senators are willing to break with Donald Trump. And I think the ones that are going to be more willing to break with him are going to be the ones that have longer to go before election. The ones that aren't up till 28 and the ones that just got elected in 24 that wouldn't be up till 2032. I think those are the Republicans you watch. Now, some of those are hardcore MAGA Republicans. Others are not. You got people like Ted Cruz, and Ted Cruz is eyeing a 2028 run himself again. And Donald Trump hasn't said the nicest things about Ted Cruz. So I think when they realize they have the votes to pass it and that they're going to get it through the Senate with impeaching Donald Trump and it goes to trial, that's when you see the House move forward on articles of impeachment. And they potentially do this. Now, it sounds far-fetched to think of Republicans going against the guy they have bucked, and that they have supported 100%. They've backed him 100% for 10 years. But I think they do because they have to. As I said earlier, Donald Trump is about to be a lame duck. He's pretty much irrelevant at this point as far as he doesn't have any more elections to run. If he loses the midterms again, he's going to go out a loser. And his endorsement isn't necessarily going to be enough to save a lot of the candidates. Now, I know he just had a win in Tennessee in that special election with Afton Bain going against Van Epps, and Van Epps won by like 9% or something. But Afton Bain in a Republican plus 22 district cut it to under 9. That's a bad sign for losing the House and losing the Senate in the midterms. There's a lot of races that would be called by less than 9%, or less than 13%, because that's how much she flipped. So if 13% of voters flipped their loyalty, if that trend follows nationwide, Republican Party's in a lot of trouble, and they're worried about getting reelected. They really are. So they could make that move. Again, they don't want to face their voters and say, well, yeah, we protected Donald Trump because of who he is. He's in the files. Now, some members of MAGA are not going to believe that Donald Trump is in the files, despite there being direct evidence, despite anything being leaked. Certain members of the MAGA movement will never believe Donald Trump did anything wrong. But some of them will. Some of them will accept the fact that he has done something wrong, and they will move away. Republicans are worried about losing that 20 to 25% of their base, maybe 30% of their base. That's hardcore MAGA, and alienating a third of their voters potentially. And not, if a third of Republican voters turn away from them and just say, well, I'm never voting Republican ever again, they're going to be in a world of hurt. You couple that with all of the other problems going on right now, and I think ultimately they end up suffering, and they could potentially be out of power for 20 years. That's why I think they move away from Donald Trump sooner rather than later. But if they don't and things go to shit as bad as I think they could be with the economy, because we've seen unofficial job numbers, because this administration is just not releasing numbers, showing the economy's taking a downturn, we're losing jobs, everything's more expensive. Donald Trump can say everything's more affordable all he wants till he's blue in the face. Blue would be a nice change from orange. But it doesn't actually make it true. He just says things and hopes people believe him. Well, with the economy going bad and everything else, we look at history, we look at the last time the Republicans fucked up the economy to the extent it could go if they don't change things with Donald Trump. And that is the 1920s with the bungling of the Great Depression and the lead up to the Great Depression and the stock market crash and all of it. As things were getting started, what did they do? They added tariffs. Tariffs made things worse. Donald Trump trying to fix the economy, he adds tariffs, he makes it worse. And they wrecked the economy to the point where people can't afford to live and they can't get food, they can't get housing, they can't do any of this. And it's getting about that bad now. And this administration says, yeah, we don't care if you eat, we don't care if you have housing. So I think that's what's going to happen is that the Republicans are going to end up deciding that it's time to move away from Donald Trump sooner rather than later. Mostly because of the Epstein files, because they don't want to have to answer their voters. And that's what they're going to end up having to make that choice. And when they do, it could end up being what happens there, that they say, okay, we got to move. Now, I was talking about the Great Depression and how Republicans fucked up. They did. They put tariffs on, and they tried to fix the Great Depression for the most part by doing nothing, which is about what this administration is doing. But every decision they do, they make things worse. They fuck up with the tariffs. China doesn't buy soybeans. And speaking of that, I've seen some posts or some comments by creators that saying, well, why don't farmers just grow things that people actually want to eat? Well, they do. They do grow things that people eat. In fact, but the big chunk of what they grow isn't for people. Like coming up from a farming area, okay? The majority of the corn, when you're driving down the highway and you see cornfields, the bulk of that is not sweet corn. That is for human consumption. That's field corn. Some of it is grown for nothing more than to be seed for the following year. Some of it ends up turning into animal feed, which that is a huge part of what they do with corn, for example, is just growing it to get turned into food for other animals, potentially cows, pigs, chickens, things we do eat. And we use soybeans for a lot of things ourselves. It's not about just growing things that people eat. It's about growing things that we need because we have the space. And we've gotten so good at maximizing yields and growing way more than we ever used to, which is a good thing. But with Donald Trump fucking around with the economy and China not buying soybeans, it's one thing after another that makes the economy worse, right? And them not doing anything to fix it or not doing enough to fix it could lead to an era where Republicans are struggling for relevance and struggling to be in power for 10 or 20 years. But that only works if the Democrats do things that actually help the American people and actually make it better. All right, so that's going to do it for today's episode of the Analytical Iowan podcast. I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today. I hope you enjoy everything I've got out today. And I'll be back tomorrow because there's always more to talk about. It never ends with this shit show that we call the Trump administration.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.